So thank you and welcome to this afternoon's TEDxWhitehall talks. My name is Tim Leunig, or as we say in the Twitter era, @TimLeunig. I'm the Chief Analyst and Chief Scientific Advisor at the English Department for Education, and I'm also Associate Professor in Economic History at the London School of Economics. But I want to be really clear today that I speak for no one but myself. In particular, a civil servant on a public platform is always a dangerous proposition. We are not constitutionally allowed to criticise the government, and so if you hear me say anything you think is a criticism of the government, you are wrong. If I criticise the government, I get fired. Nothing I say criticises the government or any future government. So, when I'm teaching at the London School of Economics, I try to be upfront and honest with the people I'm teaching. I tell them what they will and will not learn on a course. So, for example, I teach a graduate course in business history. And I tell the students this is not an MBA course in disguise. The LSE is not a business school. Instead, we will study things like the role of feuding as a contract enforcement mechanism in late medieval Germany. I would have brought a sword with me today to demonstrate feuding, but actually the theatre rules ban swords on this stage. When you see the next speaker, you'll understand how I know that. And I tell my students there are no circumstances in their lives when this information will be of any specific use to them. There are no jobs that list as an essential characteristic or skill knowledge of the role of feuding in late medieval German contract enforcement. There aren't even any pub quiz questions on it. Instead, I tell my students the point of learning this stuff is because it's interesting. It will teach them how to handle evidence. It will tell them about different ways of looking at the world. In short, it will teach them to think creatively. And that's where the jobs are these days. There are no jobs for being a human photocopier who simply knows things and can regurgitate them. There are jobs for people who can think for themselves, invent new products, invent new processes. Britain, after all, is a rich country, and the only way we will remain rich is to keep inventing stuff. Now, Britain's been a rich country now for 250 years, ever since the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment, was a period of huge creativity. The person who thought through crop rotation, getting rid of fallow fields that produce nothing, allowed more people than ever to live on the produce of England's soil, allowed those people to move to the factory, without which you cannot have an industrial revolution and yet still be fed. You think of the textile machinery, the factories of the northwest of England, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, innovation after innovation after innovation. And then the steam engine, the idea that steam, that stuff that comes out the kettle every time you make a cup of tea and then disappears without trace a moment later, that we could harness something like that and power a factory, get the water out the mines, get those locomotives to run across Britain and the world, and the steamships that would take our goods to the furthest corners. It's implausible. It's hugely creative. It's perhaps the single most important innovation in economic history. So let's think a bit more about the invention of steam power. The first successful steam engine was made by a man called Thomas Newcomen. He was an ironmonger, he lived in a mining district, he understood their issues. Mines fill with water. That's because in essence a mine is a very big hole in the ground, and one thing we know is that water runs downhill pretty easily every time it rains. So if you're a mine owner, flooding is the problem. You've got to get the water out. And Newcomen took two earlier inventions, one by Savary. And Savary showed if you have a vessel of any shape and you put steam into it and you seal the vessel, as the steam condenses into water, what is left is a vacuum. And nature abhors a vacuum. So if there's something at the edge of this vessel, it will get sucked in. Papin developed the cylinder and the piston. So you've got a tube and a piston that goes up and down. Put the two together, as Newcomen did, and you have a genius invention. Put the steam in the chamber, let it condense, it sucks the piston in. Push some more steam in, the piston goes back out again. Condense it, in, out, all day long. Connect that piston to a beam engine or a shaft, and you have motive power. Enough motive power to change the world. Now that's what I call creative thinking. Creative thinking based on knowledge. And it was absolutely typical of the Industrial Revolution. The sorts of people who invented things were very often members of the Royal Society and similar learned societies. These were, if you like, the internet of their day, where people learnt and developed ideas. And that's what I want to emphasise today, the role of creativity in education. Now, those of you who have watched any number of TED Talks may have seen Ken Robinson's TED Talk on education about creativity. I'm told it's the most watched TED Talk of all time, which gives me something to aim for. And he argues that creativity is so important, but that schools are killing it. He argues that creativity is as important as literacy. So I agree with Ken about the importance of creativity, but I think he is flat wrong to claim that schools are killing creativity. On the contrary, real creativity, successful creativity, world-changing creativity is based on knowledge. Our schools are equipping our young people with the foundations to be properly creative. Let me give you a more recent example. It stars a woman called Pauline Williams. She trained as a doctor and went in to work for a drug company, GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. One day she was at home reading The Lancet. It's the sort of thing you do if you're trained as a doctor. And she saw an article about deaths in less developed countries of newborn children. When a child is born, you have to cut the umbilical cord. That is a universal truth. In all times and in all places, you have to cut the cord. And when you do, you create an open wound that can become infected. 80,000 children a year die from infections of the umbilical cord that goes on to kill the child. And The Lancet showed that an antiseptic can prevent that infection. And she recognised the name of that antiseptic as the antiseptic that is in Cortisol mouthwash made by her company. Now, you could try tipping mouthwash over babies, but that's not a good idea, because mouthwash is liquid and it just runs off the baby. I haven't actually tried that, but I'm confident that's true. So it would provide protection, but only for a moment. So she challenged her scientists, and working with Save the Children, they made Cortisol mouthwash's active ingredient into a gel that doesn't require refrigeration, packed in a little foil container that you can tear open, so you don't need scissors, with pictograms on the outside telling you how to use it. It's just got approval, and hopefully it will go on to save the lives of 80,000 children a year. Now that's what I call creative thinking based on knowledge. Ken Robinson tells the story of a young girl who hated school and wanted to dance. She went on to be a successful choreographer, and he argued that school had been in danger of killing her creativity. Maybe he's right for that child, and my job here is not to knock dance in any way. I too have a daughter who loves dance, and I'm speaking in the West End. I know that people love dance. I know they love watching it. But still, dance versus saving 80,000 children a year, that doesn't seem like much of a comparison to me. This talk is not about arts versus science. I'm not here to say science is important and art is not. Art is very important. But art too is generally best based on a knowledge and understanding of the historical pedigree of that art form. So take Britain's leading klezmer violinist, a woman called Sophie Solomon. Sophie is one of my former students. Now, I would love to tell you that that's because in my spare time I am a stunning violin player. But if I did this, the first comment on the YouTube video will be from my former music teacher telling you that that is not true. I am so unmusical I was never allowed anywhere near a violin, much to the relief of my mother. Sophie is my former student because she has a good traditional education. Her first degree was in Russian, and then she came to LSE to study history with me and my colleagues. And her knowledge of Russian and her knowledge of history allows her to be a better klezmer violin player because she understands the tradition of that art form. She understands Russian and can study it in its original. She would not be the leading klezmer violinist of her generation without that knowledge base. And she's a great fan of learning. She's head of the Jewish Music Institute here in London and a school governor. She also has a new album coming out this autumn, so I urge you to Google her on YouTube and buy that album. Now, there are lots of ways of gaining knowledge. If you want to change the oil on your car, I recommend finding a YouTube video. I did it and discovered it was beyond my ability at car repairs, so I took the car to the garage. But for most things, reading is a good thing to do. Indeed, if you're completely illiterate, finding the right video on YouTube is a bit of a struggle because you have to know what to type in the little box at the top. If you are going to have an operation in a hospital, you want someone who is fully trained. Yes, you want them to have seen the operation, But you also want them to be literate. You don't want to be treated by a doctor who can't read the Lancet and keep up to date. Literacy is the foundation of knowledge. And that's why it's right that we celebrate the people who started, I suspect, almost all of us on our journey to literacy. Our parents, and I suspect overwhelmingly our mothers. It's my mother who taught me to read, and I suspect that's true of most of you here. So on behalf of all of you, and certainly personally, I'd like to say, thanks, Mum. Mothers and parents give us that start in life. Those parents who are currently wrestling to get their children to begin to read, to give them that love of learning and reading, are doing an invaluable job, and it's right that we celebrate them. Not only are they building their children up to be capable of learning in school and get a good job, they're also building them to be good citizens, because knowledge is important to be a good citizen. I'm a historian. I think it's good that English children grow up learning something about English history. I think it's good that French children know about the French Revolution. I even think it's good that American children grow up knowing that, for a few years at least, their number one enemy was the British. And as a Democrat, a proud supporter of democracy, I want our children to grow up knowing the dangers of totalitarianism. I want them to study Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. I want them to study Mao Zedong and the Great Leap Forward, or the Khmer Rouge and the Killing Fields. I want them to know that these easy promises that somehow dictatorship and totalitarianism work end in tears and worse than tears. In everyday democracy, I want a population that is well-informed and well-educated, to hold our politicians to account, to know when the things they're saying are plausible or less plausible. That is how civil society holds government to account. It's when democracy works best. Now, at this point, I'm running out of time and must draw to a close. I've told you about the importance of creativity, but I've told you about how creativity is not the sort of thoughts you have in a bar when you've had one too many that are just embarrassing the next day. Creativity, real creativity, is based on knowledge. It's putting different ideas together and making something better, making something new. That is based on knowledge and in turn based on literacy. That is why we in schools put so much emphasis, and rightly so, on those skills. So let me finish by saying something on behalf of my Secretary of State, all of my ministers, past, present and future, and all of my colleagues in DFE. And it is this: thank you. Thank you to all those teachers who are teaching at the moment, the teaching assistants, the parents, the lab assistants, the school leaders, the people who are inculcating knowledge and learning and understanding and creativity up and down our schools, across this country and around the world, building a better future for their individual children, for our societies and for our world. I'm going to step off the stage now, and I'm aware it's a convention that people applaud the audience. People applaud the speaker. You have shown yourself today to be a very conventional audience, and you have applauded generously. But I don't want you to applaud me as I step off this stage. I want you to applaud all those people who at this very moment, up and down this country, and as I say, around the world, are teaching children, are building a better future, because they really do deserve a round of applause. Thank you.